For a broad look at the chip sector right now, including Intel's recent struggles, we want to bring in Ronnie Chatterji. He's the former White House CHIPS Coordinator who oversaw the implementation of the $52 billion CHIPS and Science Act. He's now a professor at Duke University's Business School. And Ronnie, thank you for being with us today. Why don't we start off just with Nvidia, what you think this tells us about AI and the demand for AI and the promise?
Well, sure. I think, despite what's happening in the pre-market, we're seeing really strong continued demand for AI infrastructure. The hyperscalers are continuing to spend tens of billions of dollars in capital expenditures on building out infrastructure to support AI. And most of the hyperscalers are saying they're worried about underinvesting, not overinvesting. So while Nvidia or no other company can overcome these great expectations, I think we're very strong still in the AI infra space. And you'll continue to see a lot of tailwind in that area going forward.
And yet we have Intel, which doesn't have the AI chips that are so in demand at this point. That stock dropped by 25% earlier this month when the company came out with very disappointing earnings that kind of shocked the street. They said that they're going to be laying off 15% of their workforce. How does this happen to a company that just received $8.5 billion from the U.S. government in grants, another $11 billion in loans, to try and make sure that it's doing things like keeping us ahead in national security and creating jobs?
Well, for Intel, that money has not been allocated yet. They had a preliminary award, and they're going to have to earn it with milestones on construction, on technology and product roadmaps. And I say, look, Intel is trying to catch up in the AI space. Pat Gelsinger said that recently. They're ramping up production of their AI chips, and that's what really hit margins this past quarter. From the U.S. perspective, though, they've made a diversified bet with the CHIPS program. When we set this thing up, we realized that we couldn't bet on a single company or a single technology, and that's why you see 5 different companies in the most advanced technologies all investing in the United States of America. So that diversified bet is going to protect American taxpayers, regardless of the fortunes of any individual company.
Let me ask you, there are real questions, people asking what happens if Intel gets smashed and goes away? Would the U.S. government allow it at that point? Are you going to pour more money into this company?
Well, for me, I can't engage in that hypothetical not being in the U.S. government anymore. But what I will say is, look at some of the programs and the support that's already been announced. TSMC is building in Arizona in advanced nodes. You have Samsung building in Texas. You have Micron. You have SK Hynix on the packaging side. Both across memory and the most advanced chips, you're seeing the U.S. government make investments all across the board. You can't make your government policy dependent on a single company, and I don't think we've done that here.
We have been really slow, though. This CHIPS Act was passed 2 years ago now, and it's now larger than the latest rollout of Chinese funding, and yet it's been so slow to try and see any of the build-out of fabs. Is that because we've been slow at enacting this? Is this part of the plan? Is it because it's so hard to build some of these fabs? I mean, where do you see us getting to the point where you think the CHIPS Act has accomplished what we set out to do?
I think we're on our way. I mean, yes, 2 years from the bill, we've now seen $30 billion has already been announced in terms of preliminary allocations. Why is it preliminary? Because we have to make sure that the companies are hitting their milestones so they can build what they say they're going to build. The taxpayer would demand no less. So I think for a complicated project like this, supporting fab construction that will take years, equipment that's very complicated, and a market that's very cyclical, I think this kind of pace is on track. I also think when you look at the Chinese efforts, to be frank, this is the 3rd round of their so-called big fund, and it hasn't necessarily delivered the kinds of gains on the most advanced technologies that you would have expected. So I feel like we're in a good place. A lot of difficult challenges to unwind, but I still think we're in a good place given 2 years since the bill was passed.
Why do you think we're going to do it better than the Chinese have to this point?
I think if you look at the record up to this point, we have all 5 of the companies on the most advanced technologies, both in DRAM and logic, building here in the United States. No other economy in the world can say that. So when you look at that picture, we have the best chance to succeed in what the chip ecosystem is going to be 5 or 10 years from now. Remember, when we did this program, we didn't even think about how big AI was going to become. And if we didn't do this program, imagine where the United States would be, not making a single chip to power AI in the United States. We're going to make sure now we're going to have over a quarter of the most advanced chips in the decade made here in the United States. So I think we're on track. Definitely a lot of challenges. No one should get confident or cocky, but I think we're on track and hitting our milestones.
Ronnie, going back to your point, you mentioned that Intel hasn't received this $8.5 billion yet. They have to earn it through certain benchmarks. If they don't, what happens to that money? Does it get returned to taxpayers? Does it get redistributed to these other chip makers that you talked about? What's your guess?
Yeah, I think first we don't have sort of public confirmation on what all the specific milestones are. I imagine they'd be construction milestones, product and technology roadmaps. And if a company, any company, doesn't hit those milestones, then the taxpayer dollars will be clawed back if they're already allocated, or if they're not allocated yet, they would be distributed perhaps to other companies as part of the program. I think it's about achieving the goals of the program. And so if you could do that best by investing in other places, that's what's going to happen. But we still haven't seen that yet. And I think we have to wait to see how Intel performs going forward to see what's going to happen. And that goes true to every single company in the program. There's been over 15 big awards, so we're going to have to watch all these companies that are in progress.
A big part of the reason that this was able to pass Congress is the concern of our complete dependence on Taiwan for all of this chips manufacturing at this point. How long do you think it will take until we can say we're not so dependent on Taiwan? National security issues.
I think you'll see the money start flowing very, very soon. But of course, to build the fabs and build up that capacity, let's say in the most advanced nodes, the ones that drive artificial intelligence, training, and inference, that's going to take a couple of years to actually produce at scale. But the fact that we're building these things in the U.S. and world-leading companies like TSMC, Samsung, Micron, SK Hynix, and others are building here in the U.S., that sends a powerful signal in terms of the balance of power in microelectronics. So it'll be a little bit before we actually can produce these chips at scale. That's just a business reality. But the fact that we're starting and we have the biggest companies in the game, that's a really important signal to the rest of the world.